Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. Scott Luton here with you on Supply Chain Now. Welcome to today's show. Folks, we got a wonderful show here today. We're diving into the intersection of procurement and technology. It's quite a risk-filled environment out there in supply chain. You don't need me to tell you that. Cybersecurity threats abound. Artificial intelligence brings big positive change, but also plenty of challenges to teams everywhere. And there's no shortage of other new innovative technologies that plenty of organizations are trying to figure out, be it in procurement or other functional areas of the supply chain world. Folks, today we're going to be sharing critical insights and expertise for not only securing your company's infrastructure against a wide variety of threats that continue to evolve and multiply and a lot more, but we're also going to be sharing been there, done that perspective and expertise on how to best position your organization's procurement strategy for success and a whole bunch more. So, get ready, buckle up, bring your questions and comments. We'd love to hear from you, such as Jacqueline is tuned in with us today. Let us know, Jacqueline, where you're tuned in from, and don't go anywhere. We'd love to hear your take on the conversation throughout the next hour. Speaking of, two last reminders before we get started, we bring in our guest. Firstly, let us know what you think. Share your comments throughout this live discussion. And secondly, if you enjoyed today's show, be sure to share it with a friend or your network. They'll be better off and they'll be grateful that you did. All right, I want to get to work here today. Welcome in everybody. And now I want to welcome in our panelist, Richard McVeigh, Senior Director, IT Telecom Subject Matter Expert with OMNIA Partners. Hey, Richard, how you doing?
Hey, good afternoon. How are you, Scott?
It is great to see you. I've already learned a lot from our prep discussions. You're out there, got your finger on the pulse, moving mountains in procurement and elsewhere, especially from a technological perspective. So we got a lot to learn here today. But before we do, we got a topic to talk about. Hey, Juan, appreciate that via LinkedIn, Best Supply Chain Podcast. I'm so glad you're here. Let us know what you think of the next hour. Of course, Caitlin is here with us. Caitlin, let us know where you're tuned in from. Man and Catherine, all behind the scenes. Trisha's with us here today. Richard, we're all here to talk not just procurement tech, challenges, successes, and a lot more, but we're also talking about a topic that is near and dear to our heart.
Yes.
Mutually, barbecue. So Richard, you were born and raised in Memphis, a.k.a. Bluff City, a.k.a. Grind City, home of the blues, all things that Memphis is known for.
Yes.
But it's also home to outstanding food, including barbecue. So the fun warm-up question here today, Richard, build us that perfect plate of barbecue, and where do you get it from?
Sure. I like to say that barbecue can be, smoked, right? Anybody can smoke meat, but it's always about the fixings, right? Using our Southern terms here. It's about the sides, right? It's the sauce, it's the slaw, it's the potato salad, it's the baked beans, right? That combination makes your plate. I almost don't go to a place if they ask me if they want slaw on the sandwich, right? It just automatically comes on the sandwich. I know that's a preference for some, but you're always going up against my folks at Kansas City or in the Carolinas. In Texas, they do their beef barbecue, right? But it's definitely something that being in Nashville now, I literally sometimes make a day trip just to go to Leonard's Barbecue in Memphis.
Okay.
That's my go-to place. Elvis ate there many years ago. It was a fime and dime kind of place back in the 50s that my parents grew up going to, and quite frankly, I went to when I had to have a booster seat. So it's been around that long. But there's lots and lots of places in Memphis, Three Little Pigs, the Germantown Commissary. There's just a lot of Interstate Barbecue. Those are just to name a few.
Okay.
That you could visit. So,
man, Richard, I love it. And you have hit a grand slam on this opening question. And folks, I'm going to pose it to you. Whether it's barbecue or other really delicious food, let us know, especially when it comes to grilling, barbecue, smoked meats, as Richard put it, and all those delicious fixings. I got to share, Richard. So I couldn't just describe it. As I was getting ready for today's podcast, I had to share an image from a place I went to all the time growing up. This is a plate of food from Carolina Barbecue in New Wellington, South Carolina. Now, to your point, Richard, we'll start over here with the pulled pork with a mustard sauce on top, right?
Absolutely.
Then we got hash and rice, which if you don't know what a hash is, go Google it. We won't ruin anybody's appetite here, but it's delicious. And to your point, Richard, that slaw, and most importantly, perhaps those hush puppies, those fried pieces of dough there. Oh my gosh, that in and of itself is so delicious. And all of this is what I grew up in, eating in Aiken County, South Carolina, called Carolina Barbecue. So now, Richard, now that we are starving, and we're probably going to knock out some barbecue maybe a little later on, let's get into procurement, tech, leadership, and then some. But we've got a couple of we're making other people hungry. This might be Sylvia. Amanda, please help me out here. They love the barbecue topic to hit things off. They just found a hidden gem myself in Flat Rock, North Carolina, a few weeks ago. It looks like Hubba Hubba Smokehouse. Okay, I love that. Amanda loves pulled pork, coleslaw, baked beans, and of course, from our South Carolina influence, hush puppies. Now she's starving. Keaton says, looks so good right before lunch break as well. Keaton, let us know where you get your delicious barbecue from. All right. So now we're going to get into why we're all here. And I want to start, Richard. You have done, and we're going to touch on it in a second, 30 years of experience. A lot of things have changed. Before we get there, though, if you would briefly tell us about your background and what the OMNIA Partners team does.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, I've been in IT for nearly 30 years at this point, kind of back when I used to have hair. I started my career in technical support. I moved into IT sales, where I spent almost 20 years in technology sales, selling networking, data center, the hardware, the software, and everything in between. And then I decided I wanted to change of pace, right? And so I got out of sales. I moved to the other side of the table,
right?
Use my same skill set, if you will, and got into IT procurement, where I actually ran RFPs, negotiated terms and conditions, pricing, SLAs, all of that. But here at OMNIA Partners, I've been here about almost 2.5 years now, where I'm the IT subject matter expert. In my role, I get to speak to our customers, and both procurement and IT. I try to help bridge that gap between the two, and there's sometimes a divide between the two, and really help them understand what their business needs are, where their strategy is going. And sometimes I play free consultant, if you will, and then plug the right suppliers that are in our portfolio into the conversation. And so it's great. I get to work alongside suppliers, understanding what they do, where their expertise are, and then work alongside our members to figure out what those needs are, and then bridge the gap, can make the connections.
Oh, blessed are the gap bridgers. I think that was one of the Beatitudes that was missed and not quoted back in the day, Richard, but I love that. That's helpful context as we are kind of viewing the expertise you're going to share here today. It's really helpful background. And I would just add, a lot of our longtime audience members know that we've enjoyed a wide variety of shows with the folks at OMNIA Partners. Some of our newer audience members may not know that OMNIA Partners is a group purchasing organization, but I would say they're changing the way that GPOs operate and then bring value. We just had a great webinar just last week or so that touched on all the growth y'all have been seeing, Richard, and of course, more importantly, how you and the team leverage all that growth, experience, expertise across a wide variety of sectors to help organizations and your members navigate a more successful path forward in these highly complex and fast-moving times, which will be themes of the rest of our conversation. So before we talk about change, and more change, Richard, you and I we've started some serious barbecue conversations. I got to circle back here. Catherine loves burnt ends. I'm with you, Catherine. Excellent call out. Amy talks about Maybell's barbecue in Cleveland. I wonder if that's Ohio or Georgia. It's probably, or Tennessee, maybe. Great to have you here, Amy. Jim Weber, greetings from Denver, Colorado, not known for its barbecue. However, Memphis barbecue is featured just outside Phoenix. How about that? Okay. And let's see here. Brian Simber. Brian says heirloom barbecue in Atlanta, GA, run by a former K-pop idol. How about that? Fusion barbecue at its best.
Ooh, that sounds delicious.
And Amy's circling back. That is Cleveland, Ohio for Maybell's Barbecue, not Cleveland, Tennessee or Cleveland, Georgia. Cleveland, Ohio. Okay, I'm going to check that out. All right, so Richard, I'm going to have to pull myself away from the barbecue discussion. We got a lot of stuff to get to here today. So you've been in the technology space for almost 30 years, as you laid out a minute ago. You developed, from what I can tell, we've done some homework on you, Richard. We've done some homework on you. You developed quite a reputation for developing tech solutions across that wide range of business verticals. You have been intricately involved in the negotiations of really big, complex contracts from $1 million to $100 million plus. Man, that's some tough work. Good on you, Richard. And a lot has evolved. I don't have to tell anybody this. A lot's evolved in the tech space over the last 30 years. I want to ask you, Richard, you've been in it. What's been one of your favorite moments or chapters in terms of technology innovation for global supply chain?
Sure. So I'm going to date myself. This story goes back about 20 years at this point. But
okay,
one of my favorite moments was back when I worked for AT&T, the legacy T company, and shortly after their merger with SBC and Bell South back in 2005.
Yeah.
We had a client, nationwide client, that was looking for large bandwidth. And I know, to date myself, T1s and T45s were the thing back then, right?
Yep.
And so MPLS had just been rolled out. We actually did the very first MPLS customer. But they were looking for any connectivity, and they really wanted it between cities and at 1 gig speeds. And of course, that was very, very, very expensive. I remember going, an MPLS port's going to cost you $100,000. Just
wow,
right? And so, but what we did realize, and I worked with my technical engineer on this, you could take a legacy product from Bell South called Metro E and an OptiLAN from SBC, and then connect that with barbells, if you will, the Ethernet private line service from legacy T. And what we realized was, in engineering it, we, instead of connecting site to site, we ended up connecting pop to pop, right? Central office to central office, because SBC is on one floor, Bell South is on another,
okay,
T is on another. And so ended up, we devised what we called the McBeatty. That my engineer was Richard Beatty, I was Richard McVeigh, so we called it the McBeatty. Implemented it, contracted for it, it went flawless. And then corporate called and said, "What have you guys done?" And so, what kind of concoction is this? And ultimately, it ended up becoming a product. At the end of the day, it was referred to as OptiWAN at the time. Now, of course, technology has changed exponentially since then, right? In the last 20 years, 1 gig to 10 gig speeds are very norm at this point. And any type of solutions are a given, and now we got cloud offerings. And that's one of the things I love about being a part of IT is it's ever evolving. You're always having to learn, right? And grow as a professional. And so that's my one kudo, I think, going back in time, kind of helping create a brand new product.
Love that. And I bet there's plenty of others. I look forward to the book you're going to write as you navigate. I mean, gosh, to be in technology and in procurement, supply chain, and just business in general for the last 30 years, it's been fascinating. And folks, I'd love to hear from you. Let us know if you think back over the last 20 or 30 years, what's been one big technology shift that really sticks out on your radar? I'd love to hear from you. I got to share, Richard. I got to share. And by the way, Bink Beatty, I bet there's such a bigger story. I love how you got creative, brought in know-how, and created something that didn't exist at the time. Love that story. So I was a data analyst. If I think back 30 years ago, almost 30 years ago, I was a data analyst for the United States Air Force back in 96 or so. 486, remember the 486 PCs? That was like the fast ones in the office. We still had 286s until we got these Pentium-driven computers, which was like a Corvette. Man, those things were fast. At the time, we still had high-speed dot matrix printers. Mm-hmm. We saved our new laser printer, which we thought we were really highfalutin, for the group commander's briefing slides, where we'd, unfortunately, not the most sustainable, we'd print out 3,000 slides for like a weekly briefing. Right. All of that, of course, has changed dramatically. And in a broader sense, and I think you agree with me based on some pre-show conversations,
Mhm.
another big change over the last few decades is that the IT team in organizations is not simply a cost center, but
Yes.
they are an inseparable component of the company and the team that's utilized to drive revenue, profitability, competitive advantage, resilience, and a whole bunch more. Would you generally agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. That times have changed, right? When you talk about no longer a call center, I used to use that phrase a lot in my sales days.
Yeah.
Working with business owners, right? They're no longer the IT department, they're actually business owners now. Really driving innovation and streamlining processes and procedures, and then go to helping develop go to market strategies by leveraging the technology that they're implementing. So
Yep.
all of that, it's evolved a lot, right, over the last 20, 30 years. And to the point we were making earlier, now we're starting to see procurement and IT really kind of get in bed together, right, and start working more strategically together to try to drive outcomes. And so
Yes.
that's something that's really good to see.
That's a great call out because the procurement function, procurement leadership is evolving as well and is involved. It's cool again. It's in boardrooms, much like supply chain broke out in recent years and made its way into boardrooms. And that is a great thing for global supply chains everywhere, in my view.
Yes.
Okay, a few folks weighed in here. Brian says cloud computing, the single biggest change in his mind, at least. That's a good call out, Brian. Great to have you here. Keaton says 30 years, longer than I've been around. But love to see how technology has allowed us to connect with people from anywhere in the world from home. Keaton, well said, very poetic, and I'm
Yes.
grateful for the same thing. Okay, well, I'm glad you're here. We got a subject matter expert. We're going to be just really scraping the tip of the iceberg here today, but we got a lot of good stuff to get into because our primary topic today, Richard, as you know, is enhancing procurement strategies for today's information technology challenges. Now, Richard, have you ever heard the phrase, you got to eat your frogs first?
I have not heard that.
Okay. Well, I thought we were second cousins. I guess maybe not. All right. So that's some kind of saying, maybe in just the South, but it means you got to start with the tougher and more painful tasks,
There you
which
go.
is a productivity approach that some subscribe to. So, as we start to dive into our formal discussion, I want to start with some of the headaches that we're seeing out there that you're seeing, especially as you help teams conquer this environment in new and innovative ways. So, what are some of the most common challenges when it comes to IT procurement these days?
Well, there's many challenges, but in my goings and doings across the industry, in my opinion, there's two primary challenges to IT procurement. One is time, and the other is the knowledge of the subject. So, running an RFP can take 6 to 12 months, depending on the complexity.
Yep.
And there's a lot of time that gets spent up front, you know, by the person running the RFP. They got to go learn about the subject, learn about the industry, who the players are, what are some of the key solicitation points that they need to put in, what are negotiation strategies once they receive all of the solicitation responses back, right? So there's a lot that goes on just from a learning perspective. Even with the ability to learn via, from the internet or via chat GPT these days, about cloud or cybersecurity, still the person running the RFP is not typically the expert in the subject, right? So that kind of goes back to a previous comment where we made it's really important that they lean in and work with their IT department, right?
Yep.
And depending on the size of your company, you may have an expert in that field that you can lean on. But in a lot of cases, smaller to mid-sized companies may not, right? So that procurement person is just kind of out there, charging forward on their own. But this leads to another challenge, and that's most companies have no idea what it costs to run an RFP, right? When you're talking 6 to 12 months, you're talking learning curves. What's the soft cost that goes into running an RFP, right? The time, the effort. It usually goes untracked. Recently, the National Cooperative Procurement Partners released an article that just this past month that talked about how much it costs to conduct an RFP. And the findings were just astonishing. It anywhere from $1,500 an hour on the low end to almost $17,000 per hour on the high end, right? And when you start taking that per hour and extrapolating that out over the time it takes, it can be very, very expensive.
Oh,
And then finally, I'd say, you got to take into consideration when you talk about time to run an RFP, technology changes, right? I mean, if you take 12 months to run an RFP, your company may be going in a different direction by then.
world's changed by then.
Right, the world has changed. The laptop is end of life, or no longer pertinent. I mean, there's just different. The strategy is different. So there's a lot to think about when it comes to running an RFP, and that's how Omnia Partners can help.
Appreciate that, Rich. Man, you covered a lot there. Really quick before I respond. Hey, Azuka from Lagos. Great to see you here today. It's been too long since we were together in person at a SAPIX event. Great to have you, and love to hear your perspective on procurement tech and a better path forward. All right. So, Richard, you touched on a lot of things there in terms of headaches, time, knowledge of the subject, costs, and all sorts of definitions, right, including those intangibles. Also, I like your last one, how the world can change, if in 6 months, if it takes 6 months, a work can change then too. And you also called out this article. And when you put this on my radar, I went diving in like I typically do. And folks, you can find this at NCPPA or ncppassociation.org, right? The Professional Association for Cooperative Procurement. And you're right. According to their research, a project, a bid or RFP can take an average of 87 hours to complete, and complex projects can take the team 138 hours. And of course, that doesn't even include all the intangibles. Now, I'm going to say something here that I bet everybody knows what I'm talking about, and I think this really makes it really clear, is that time is money. It's competitive advantage. It's all kinds of things in this velocity-driven world. Kind of to your point, the world can change in a year, much less, or 6 months, much less, a year. And so, all to that end, I want to ask you this, because we know that it can be incredibly costly when we choose the wrong approach or the wrong solution, right? If we do it on our own without bringing in the experts, internally or externally, the cost can be tremendous when we implement the wrong things to address some of these headaches. What have you seen, Richard, in all of your experience? What have you seen, and how costly can a poor or unsuccessful solution to these challenges be?
So very costly, as we mentioned, right? Because the technology changes so rapidly, because of the direction of a company or that business unit that you were previously running an RFP for may change, right? Leadership may change, as simple as that. And many companies are in a place today where, speed to market, capitalization of assets, cutting costs, et cetera, can mean the difference between success and failure, right? Especially for those small, medium-sized businesses, right? They've got to turn on a dime and move forward.
Yep.
So, meeting market expectations is key, right? Being able to drive to finalization in your plan is key. At the end of the day, I mean, I've been a part of RFPs and where I worked on them for a month, and then we decided we're tossing it out the door, right? And starting over, and you're like, wait a minute.
I put my blood, sweat, and tears in this. Come on, right?
I mean, you saw there it was like 87 hours or something like that. I was like, well, I wish it was only a solid 87 hours, but it's not, right? Because typically procurement professionals have multiple RFPs that they're running simultaneously, right? So think about, I'm over here procuring for cybersecurity, but now I'm over here procuring for laptops, and then I'm over there procuring for networking gear, and I've got to learn about all of those things and continue to move them all forward. Where I came from before, we ran everything via a Gantt chart, but you had to, right? You had to kind of put place markers of all your tasks in there to know I can stay on track, right? And so it's a labor intensive effort, and you hope, right, at the end that you reach the goal of whatever that is, whether it's savings which is usually usually the priority for the RFP. But then obviously you want to make sure you're getting the right suppliers that bid on the RFP, right? And you're vetting out with them on service level agreements and value adds and things like that. So it's just so much that goes into it. And to say, again, I love these studies that are done because you try to put some costs. I think I see these about once a year, but then everybody goes back to doing things the way they did, and you really don't know how much it costs you to run an RFP.
Nope. So much is invisible. So much is like everything else, but we've always done it this way, and there can be some really awful costs associated, headaches associated, friction, tougher days on the team as well. That's one element maybe we should talk more about is the pressure it puts on the team, right? When they're, to your point, they're juggling all these things. How can we make it easier on our team? And then the other thing you mentioned, I want to bring in Dennis's comment here. Dennis, great to see you here today. Says the biggest challenge, RFPs should never take over 3 months. Too much changes. I tend to agree with you, Dennis. And you've got to be able to find a more successful, effective way to fit in maybe at that traditional 12-month, 6-month RFP into a 3-month or less span. Excellent call out, Dennis. A couple of things you said there, Richard, I want to pull out for the audience just to kind of double down on. You mentioned small and medium-sized businesses. I've worked for really big companies, Fortune 500 companies, my background, and I've worked for some mom and pops, right? I'm in a startup environment now. You wear lots of hats.
Yes.
They don't have all the resources in small and even medium business world that you have, the teams, the resources, the technology platforms, and more. And really, I think we see a lot of small and medium businesses turning to resources like GPOs to help level the playing field in effective ways. You mentioned hope. We all hope things go right, but hope is, as we both know, an awful strategy. And I'm glad you called that because there's too much hope and prayer going on out across business, right? And then finally, of course, we're talking about velocity. My dear friend Greg White used to say a lot, going fast is important, but gosh, if you're going fast in the wrong direction, you got at least double as many problems, right? I'm kind of paraphrasing, but velocity is important, but going in the right direction is kind of equally as important, right?
Yes.
Okay. So much. You got my brain going, Richard, and I've got 1,000 things going on between my ears based on what you're sharing. But here's one thing that I love to talk about, and that is good news, because there's plenty of good news here. Mm-hmm. Some of this innovative technology that we've all been seeing and using, or at least in some cases trying to figure out how to use, it's been changing how business is done already. More importantly, with the results and outcomes to prove it. In fact, get this, Richard. You hanging on to your socks? Because this figure might astound you. According to the World Economic Forum, the digitalization, I can never say that word, digitalization of the global trade ecosystem is projected to unlock some $9 trillion in value across just the G7 countries, just through 2025. I mean, we're talking right around the corner. Those are big, lots of continents there.
Wow.
So I want to ask you, in light of that and all the perspective you've shared, talk about some of the newer technologies that are permeating throughout global supply chain, especially the procurement space.
Yeah, really good question. So, there's several technologies that are helping, the procurement space evolve to identify trends, streamline processes, and enhance decision-making, right? There's simple sourcing platforms, cloud-based procurement solutions that allow procurement teams to run something as simple as reverse auctions, right? That's a very simplistic way of going about it. And usually it's just lowest bid wins type of things.
Yep.
But then there's, you kind of evolve and become more complex and you move towards more of a supplier relationship management type of platforms that offer collaboration, right, between the buyer and the supplier, right, where you really kind of outline, and I would even go so far as to go back into your, contractually outline some type of vested relationship between you, the buyer, and your suppliers, where there's hooks in it for both of you, and you're in this together, right? the cliche win, it's a win-win, right? And you're really kind of driving towards those type of outcomes. And then obviously there's, even more advanced AI solutions, right? Where, you're able to drive towards real-time insights, right? Across, for cost and supplier performance, spend analytics, and then really offer more predictive analytics to help with forecasting, cost avoidance, and et cetera. I I see lots of data, right? I talk to lots of members, I see lots of data, and it's amazing to me to find what's commonly referred to as shadow IT, right? That's one. Hey, we've contracted over here with this supplier A, but people are buying their product from supplier B, right? And it's not on contract. But then I would even go so far as to say we need to be running analytics against our purchasing within a supplier, right?
Yep.
I see people buy product all day long, and you bought it for $10, a mouse for $10, and then you turned around and bought it the next time and it was $17, right? And so really getting into what's the high and the low, and then where is my negotiated price point, and all those kind of things really are what's going to start driving the market going forward, as these tools start to come together and people really start to figure out how to leverage them.
Yep. A lot of good stuff there. And, it can be very difficult to leverage all those technologies and then some, kind of figuring out the right application, the right integration, interoperability with other technologies that organizations may be using. It's not for the faint of heart, but man, when we get it right, and more, as much, I'm a huge believer in the human factor, and it is the lifeblood of global supply chain, right? And I'd like to think it always will be. However, as we have talked with countless companies over in recent years, there's certain things we just can't do without technology, especially at scale. So being able to crack the code or figure out the Rubik's cube, right, of supply chain technology is so important. And AI, you mentioned AI. So you mentioned lots of technologies there. And folks out there listening or watching us, let us know some tech platforms that you and your organization may be investing in. I'd love to get your feedback there. But of course, you mentioned AI. And my hunch is that you spend a ton of time helping your customers across different sectors evaluate AI and figure out how to make things more predictive. Is that right?
So we do, right? So we have our own spend analytics team here at OMNIA Partners that can help a member ingest the data, right?
Yep.
Understand where they're spending their dollars, who they're spending them with, and then we can work to find ways to better procure those type of solutions and products through our supplier partners that we have on contract. And then I really help them drill into what are you buying, right? And helping them determine whether or not that's, the path forward, right? Again, I pointed out earlier, I can look at your spend data and start going, you bought that mouse for $10, then you turned around and bought it for $19. Why are we doing that? Oh, you bought it from this bar, but then you went on Amazon and bought, 200 more. Like, really you gotta triangulate all of that.
That's right.
But back to your point, so AI and there's lots of other analytic tools that can help you with that, but there's RPA, right? Process automation that can really take a lot of the mundane task out of doing a lot of that work, right? And then there's Gen AI tools that can really start driving more towards predictive analytics. So, there's a host, I go back, AI right now, big buzzword. It means lots and lots of things. Very similar to where cloud was when it first became the buzzword.
That's right.
So, we'll see where it all hashes out. I think there's going to be pitfalls here and then successes there, but overall, it's here to stay.
Yeah.
It's only here to help us.
I do agree. And you need most organizations, most business leaders, most supply chain practitioners, most do need a Sherpa, a guru they can turn to help them navigate. Get this. The DC Velocity published takeaways from a survey of 3,000 CEOs from the United Kingdom, Europe, and the US here recently. We just tackled this on the buzz the other day. 82% of U.S. CEOs are planning new initiatives this year. This year. I'm surprised that's not higher, frankly. But because it's here to stay, and because it's making a big impact, doesn't mean that there aren't still plenty of bad applications and poorly planned initiatives with ambiguous returns. And Richard, what I'm hearing you and your work and your team's work there in this AI space and predictive analytics space is you're helping ensure that the spend and the projects are more successful and produce more reliable outcomes and results. Is that a fair statement?
It is, right? So, we have, gone through our own RFP contracting processes with our supplier partners. We have vetted them out for, their business solutions. And so, we've kind of taken a lot of that heavy lift off of our members, right?
Yep.
And now they can start buying them tomorrow if they wanted to, right? Versus having to run that RFP, versus having to go through that contract negotiation, which I've been in those for 6 long months as well, right? So, all of that being said, we are the easy button here at OMNIA Partners, and, as a GPO, where we've vetted that out. We've got the right partners, we've got the right solutions to help out a business.
You've got the new McBady's 2.0 there at OMNIA Partners, perhaps. All right, I want to shift gears here.
Sure.
On average, and it's important, we're not trying to scare anybody, but going back to what we were talking about a little while ago, the costs are immense. The costs are immense on a variety of levels, tangible and intangible. On average in 2024, a data breach costs almost $5 million. Cyber attacks aren't only multiplying, which that in and of itself is scary enough, right?
Yeah.
But they're also becoming so much more complex. And we've seen, Richard, no shortage of cyber attacks across global supply chain, folks, from petrochemical plants in Saudi Arabia to water treatment facilities in the U.S. to retail supply chains everywhere. It's no longer a question of if you get hit by a cyber attack, but it's when and how bad, and how you effectively and proactively mitigate the risk-filled environment. Get this, a 2023 attack on the port of Nagoya in Japan disrupted about 10% of total trade in that country for days. In recent weeks, the Port of Seattle has been dealing with ransomware attacks. And thus far, we'll see how this plays out. They've refused to pay the hackers. I'm kind of proud of them. Good on you, Port of Seattle. We'll see how that works out, hopefully. Now, it also goes, all the procurement pros and leaders that are with us here today know that the procurement function supply chain organizations can be a bigger at-risk target due to a number of reasons, including all the sensitive information that's kept for working across its ecosystem, the organization's ecosystem, and all the communications it has with individuals and entities outside those proverbial four walls, which is ripe for hacker interdiction. So, Richard, now that we've kept it real on some of the risks out there, share some of the cybersecurity threats that supply chain leaders need to be aware of a little more specifically. Your thoughts?
Well, so as you mentioned, the most common one's ransomware, right? So it's still the most common way in, if you will.
Yeah.
You click a link in an email, right? And so phishing and social engineering is still the number one attack type, which is why it's, you start investing in procurement tools that allow you to keep everything in-house, right? And to keep the communication back and forth between your suppliers secure.
Yep.
That's going to be key. Because as you mentioned, lots of sensitive data there. The next are third-party breaches, supplier breaches, right? So, if you've been in the industry long enough, you've heard of stories like Target was breached and through their AC system, right? And lost massive amounts of credit card data. There was a major casino several years back that was breached through their electronic temp monitoring system for the fish tank that sat in the lobby, right? So, cybersecurity criminals, they're not coming through the front door, right? Which is why procurement professionals, as we have to make sure that we are working with the business owners and we are properly vetting the suppliers, right? We want to understand what vulnerabilities they may introduce into our environment,
yep.
right? so that we can contractually obligate or work with that supplier around service level agreements, right? If there responses to if there ever was a possible cyber attack, you want to make sure that you've negotiated strong terms and conditions and service level agreements. So, it's not just enough to know what's going on inside your four walls, right? From a cybersecurity stance perspective, but you also got to know everyone that's touching your business or you're touching theirs, right? It's just paramount today.
Absolutely. It's table stakes. It goes with what we do in global supply chain management. It goes with what we do in procurement, right? And I love those examples you used. Over the years, a couple of my favorites, a bowling league, right? A bowling league. I saw a study done with one of our past guests where employees from a manufacturing company all played in this bowling league. Well, the hackers, the bad actors do what bad actors do. They identified that through social media. They happened to penetrate the bowling alley's database where all the team members would put in their scores. Somehow, probably through email and whatever, they were able to find a hole into the manufacturing technology site via email and other platforms. And they ended up shutting down the production line for ransoms, right? All just through folks on a Tuesday night having a good time and a few adult beverages with their colleagues. So the threats are immense.
Absolutely.
And supplier communications. I think you mentioned that too. In my past journey, Richard, we were the victim of the bad actors penetrating systems and watching the going and coming of communications via email inside and outside the organization. And those and think about that. We do that every day, all day, every hour, all hours, right? And each one of those presents an opportunity for bad actors to
absolutely
take out your weakest link in the ecosystem, if not worse, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Let's see here. T Squared, great to have you here today. Ransomware, he says, has been the sleeper that too many are waking up late to. DPW is anyone. Now that's a new acronym for me, Richard. You may know it. I'm gonna have to Google that. DPWs.
I'm gonna have to Google that. If you're in IT long enough, you know that there are acronyms for just about everything.
Oh man.
And some acronyms mean multiple things, and some things have multiple acronyms. So you almost
all
have
the time
have a 3-ring binder to keep up with it.
Just to keep up with the vernacular. So T Squared, you're gonna have to fill me in at least because acronyms abound. They also say collaborate ×3 with the end customer on security. Great point. I would add ×3, maybe ×5 with suppliers, team members, certainly customers, because we're only as strong as the weakest link across all of those.
Yes.
Okay, more good news, folks. More good news, because there's lots of solutions, Richard, that you're familiar with, that you've helped your member companies put in place and navigate through successfully. What are some of the solutions you want to identify here?
Yeah, so at OMNIA Partners, as I mentioned, we have a number of supplier partners that offer a variety of cybersecurity solutions. Everything from basic messaging and endpoint protection to more advanced solutions like security events management, governance and consulting assessments, around your cybersecurity policies.
Yep.
Right. So, and then we have suppliers that can do full on 24/7 monitoring and remediation. And then there's also, those are really more of the in-house defensive sides of cybersecurity. And then there's the offensive side of cybersecurity, right? So where you're doing everything from network and application pen testing, red team, ethical hacking. We've got suppliers that can do all of that for our members.
And I imagine, we've covered really throughout the show a myriad, if I said that word right, of threats and solutions. You just said some of those things that I bet you could describe in your sleep that frankly I've heard of for the first time. And I bet I'm not alone. I bet there's other supply chain practitioners that may have heard some of those things you mentioned, some of those solutions you mentioned for the first time. So I bet that with all of the different permutations of the threats and solutions and all other factors, that you help customers, that you and the OMNIA Partners team help customers kind of figure out the right fit solution, the most effective solution to kind of cut through the noise for any of the specific threats that are out there, with kind of what we are talking about earlier, with an eye towards speed to outcomes, which is
Yeah.
so critical. Is that, do I got it right, Richard?
You've got it right.
Okay. I don't hear that too often. All right. T Squared, who, by the way, holds the fort down for us on YouTube, says DPW. No wonder I didn't get it. Department of Public Works. So what he's pointing out, municipalities, healthcare, manufacturing for sure, higher education. We're talking a lot about procurement here today, but all of those are elevated at-risk sectors and industries, including some of these municipalities. Richard, did you hear about the one? I can't remember where it was, and I wouldn't want to call them out and embarrass anybody, but it was a water department in a city somewhere that was still using 1972, whatever computers were doing back in 1972 to run and manage the water system and billing and invoicing. And as you might expect, they got hacked.
Yeah.
So
folks out there with probably some AS400s that are still running, right?
Undoubtedly. Okay. So let's see. I want to do this. Richard, I know you travel the globe. You got your finger on the pulse. You're on the move, working with a wide variety of organizations in a whole bunch of sectors. But I imagine there's going to be some folks that tuned in here today that want to connect with you, learn more, maybe talk shop a little bit. Sure. And you're game for doing that, especially if it involves a plate of barbecue, right?
I'm open for a plate of barbecue anytime.
So how can folks connect with you, Richard McVeigh, and the OMNIA Partners team?
It's very simple. Go to omniapartners.com. There is a drop down there to connect with the subject matter experts. I'm one of 4 that is listed there. You can fill out the form very easily and submit that. I get the email, and then we'll start corresponding.
It's just that easy. And we need more easy stuff in this ever fast moving and complex world. I appreciate that. And Jim, he says, why have I not seen or heard more about quantum computing and many other technologies he lays out there integrating with AI? Jim, it's a great question. And I'm going to tell you, based on what I've learned, and I'm trying to get studied up on quantum computing, we are right around the corner from some incredible breakthroughs in global supply chain and elsewhere as it relates to quantum computing. So stay tuned. We'll have to bring on Kevin L. Jackson, and he'll unpack it for us, Jim, but great to have you here today. Folks, we try to make it easy. We dropped Richard's LinkedIn, or we dropped Richard's URL that he just shared with us there, right there in the chat. You're one click away. My hunch is that we'll also be dropping Richard's LinkedIn profile also in the chat, again, to make it easy. Because we want to help you all make the connections, right? We want to help create the conversations that move your organization and our industry forward for sure. Richard, y'all brought some other things, and I want to pull up a couple of these things, and we'll start with perhaps the best thing, because folks, it is free to join OMNIA Partners, be a member, join your ally in the purchasing process. It's free. And, some folks say there's no such thing as a free lunch. And while that may be right in some cases, it's free to plug into a GPO community that's on the move, doing things so different than what we've seen in the past with other group purchasing organizations. So check that out. We're dropping a link right there in the chat. We got a great video. Richard McVeigh was the star of the show. I think he's been nominated for an Oscar for his performance in this video entitled Maximizing IT Solutions with Group Purchasing. Richard, I bet you had a lot of fun sharing this message, huh?
It was great. I'm starting to ramp up and work towards my Emmy, I think, as I do more and more of these videos and live sessions.
I love it.
I wish I had, but
I love it. This is a good message, and it's also brief. Yeah, I struggle with being brief. You nailed it. So, folks, check out this video again, focused on maximizing IT solutions with group purchasing. And finally, a neat timely blog article, how purchasers can protect business from impending cyber threats. And I bet a lot of folks wish they had read this long before incidents that have taken place against their organization. Threats abound, but so do solutions and proven experts that operate in a trust-filled, outcome-driven way. And I would propose to you that Richard McVeigh and our friends at OMNIA Partners are just that. Richard, really appreciate you being here today. Thanks so much for sharing what you're seeing, what you're doing, your expertise, and other observations with our Supply Chain Now global audience.
Yeah, I appreciate the time, Scott. Appreciate the time, everyone.
You bet. All right. Richard McVeigh, Senior Director, IT Telecom Subject Matter Expert with our friends at OMNIA Partners, your ally in the purchasing process. I love that phrase. It's uplifting. Feels like you've got folks that got you back. We all need more of that, right? Learn more, folks, at omniapartners.com. And again, thanks for, I know we couldn't hit everybody's comment and question here today. Thanks for being here. I really appreciate all the conversations we had from around the world. Richard, really appreciate your expertise. But here's the thing, folks, you either got to take just one thing from our barbecue best practices, or better yet, not as tasty, but better yet, take just one thing from the brilliance and the truckload of perspectives that Richard brought here today on the ever-changing world, both of procurement and technology. Take one thing, put it in action. Your teams are ready to do business different, do business better, and certainly more resilient. And that's the charge of the day, deeds, not words. With all of that said, on behalf of the entire team at Supply Chain Now, Scott Luton, challenge you, hey, do good, give forward, be the change that's needed. We'll see you next time right back here at Supply Chain Now. Thanks, everybody.